Ok, super. Donc, c'est 14 heures.
Great, it's
On va
2 o'clock.
commencer.
We will
Merci
start.
beaucoup de vous joindre
Thank
à nous pour
you
cette
for joining
édition de la
us
soirée
for
des
this
webinaires du FMV, le Fonds municipal vert.
edition of the Green Municipal
If
Fund
you are
webinar
in the
series.
original language channel right now, please note that this webinar is happening in French and simultaneous interpretation is provided. So if you go to the little black bar at the bottom of your screen and you click the globe icon, you'll be able to access simultaneous interpretation to listen in English. Chaque mois, nous organisions des
Every
webinaires sur des sujets
month,
pertinents
we
pour les programmes
organized
du Fonds
webinars
municipal vert.
for relevant
Je suis Fiona Simons,
topics.
je suis une
I'm
agente au projet
Kenya
FRAPAGI,
Simons.
de
I'm
l'équipe
a
développement des
project
capacités du
officer
Fonds
for
municipal
the
vert.
capacity
Et j'animerai
building
la séance
team
d'aujourd'hui.
for the Green Municipal Fund, and I will chair the meeting today.
Nous allons commencer cette
We will
réunion en
start
reconnaissant
this
que nous nous
meeting by
rencontrons sur des
recognizing
terres
that we are
habitées par
meeting
des peuples
on
originaires
lands
des Lumières d'Ontario.
that
Mais
are
avant de
occupied
poursuivre,
by
les peuples
Indigenous
autochtones
people
ont
for
été
a
les
long
gardiens
time.
de ce que nous
They
appelons
have
aujourd'hui le
been
Canada.
the
Nous
wardens of what we
reconnaissons
call
votre
Canada
mission,
today.
les
We
Anishinaabe
recognize
Algonquins, comme les gardiens
Anishinaabe
traditionnels du
Algonquin
territoire
people
sur
as the
lequel nous nous
traditional
réunissons et nous
wardens of the
apprécions en sa
territory
juste
on
valeur
which
leur lien
we meet, and
historique
we
avec ces terres.
appreciate their historical
Nous
link
reconnaissons également
with
les
this
contributions
land.
des Métis,
We
des Inuits
recognize the
et
Métis,
toutes les
Inuit,
Premières Nations
and
qui ont
all
façonné
First
et
Nations
renforcé la
that
connectivité de ce lieu
made
particulier pour
this
notre pays et le Fonds en
place
spécial.
in particular and Canada as a
Veuillez
whole.
noter que à la
Please
suite de ce webinaire,
note
nous
that after
organiserons
this
une séance
webinar,
d'information sur
we'll have an
l'engagement
information
inclusif.
session on
Lors de cette session,
inclusive
vous pourrez rencontrer
engagement,
directement le
and you will be
personnel du
able
Fonds municipal
to
vert
meet
pour poser des
people from
questions
the
sur
Green
le
Municipal
cycle
Fund
des
in
candidatures du
order
Fonds
to
municipal vert
ask a
et sur
question
la meilleure
about
façon de mettre en
applications
œuvre
and
les
the best
principes
way to
d'inclusion et
implement the
dans vos projets.
inclusion
Nous vous
principle in your
encourageons à vous
projects.
inscrire à cette
We
session en
encourage you
utilisant le lien
to
que nous vous
register in that
partagerons dans le
session
chat maintenant.
by using the link that we will put in the chat.
L'événement aujourd'hui se déroulera en
Today's
français, comme je l'ai
event will
dit,
take place
avec une
in
interprétation
French.
en
As I
anglais.
said, there will
So
be
if anybody
interpretation
is
in
listening to the
English.
French and would like to connect in English, please click the globe button at the bottom of the screen and you'll be able to access the simultaneous interpretation. Au fil de nos présentations, nous n'aurons pas le temps aujourd'hui de poser des questions.
We won't
Mais
have
nous
time
aimerons
to
vous inviter
ask
à poser vos
questions
questions
today, but
spécifiques au
please,
drop-in session
you
d'aujourd'hui,
can bring
qui est
your
que nous
specific questions
organiserons
to the
le
drop-in
18
session
septembre.
that will be organized on
Vous
September
pouvez quand même
18th.
ajouter les
You
ressources
can
et commentaires
still
dans la boîte de
add
chat.
resources and comments in the chat box.
Le webinaire aujourd'hui comprend deux
The
présentations
webinar today will
complémentaires sur les
have
différentes
two
façons où vous pouvez
presentations
commencer à
on the way
intégrer l'engagement
that you can
inclusif
start
dans vos projets, alors que vous
integrating
envisagez de demander
inclusive
une soumission au
engagement
Fonds municipal
in
vert.
your
Dans
projects.
ce webinaire, vous
In
découvrirez
this
les étapes à
webinar,
suivre
you
pour
will
intégrer les questions
discover
d'équité,
actionable steps to
favoriser des
integrate
relations
equity
significatives et
and
créer des résultats équitables
concerns, foster
et
meaningful
obtenir des idées
relationship,
et
and
des résultats
ensure
pratiques pour
equitable
améliorer vos demandes
outcomes in order to
auprès du
improve
Fonds municipal vert
your
et le développement
application
de
for
votre pays.
the Green Municipal Fund.
Je suis ravie d'être
I'm
rejointe
very
aujourd'hui par deux
happy
excellents
to
intervenants sur
have
l'engagement
two
inclusif.
great
On a
panelists on inclusive
Chuck
engagement.
Odenigbo,
We have Chuck
directeur
Odenigbo.
conseil
He's the
évaluation de
consulting
l'impact du
director,
Tamarack
impact
Institute,
evaluation
et
from
Chess
the
Pierre-Paul,
Tamarack
qui est
Institute,
notre
and
spécialiste en
Chess
équité et
Pierre-Paul, a
inclusion,
specialist
lutte contre le racisme et
anti-racism,
réconciliation,
equity,
ici
and
au Fonds municipal
inclusion,
vert.
as well as
Avec ça, je vais passer la
reconciliation.
parole à Chuck
I
pour
will
sa
let
présentation.
Chuck start with his presentation today.
Parfait, parfait.
Great.
Excellent. OK.
Great.
Bon après-midi tout le monde. Bon
Good
matin pour celles et
afternoon,
ceux qui se
everyone.
trouvent en
Good
Colombie-Britannique ou
morning for
Yukon.
those in BC or the Yukon.
Comme Kara mentionné, je m'appelle
As
Chuck
Kara
Odenigbo. Je
mentioned,
suis directeur conseil
my
d'évaluation de l'impact du
name
Tamarack
is
particulièrement
Chuck
sur
Odeningo,
le territoire
and I
de
am
l'État
on
Laurentide.
the
Je
territory
m'occupe
of
ici
number
numéro
8
6
treaty and
au
also
nord-ouest de Saskatchewan, une ville francophone britannique qui
treaty
s'appelle Montréal.
Métis
Comme c'est
homeland number
mentionné
6.
aujourd'hui, je
As
vais
I
vous
mentioned
présenter
today, I will
stratégies de l'organisation
present
inclusive
equity and
au Canada.
inclusivity in community engagement.
Avec cela en tête,
This being said, these are the objectives for the presentation. First of all, I would like to give you a baseline on which we'll launch our discussion. So I will define a few terms that I think are important, and then we'll go to tools and techniques so that you'll be supported in your community engagement so that it's more inclusive and welcoming for all. So to start, we'll talk about we're talking about utopian authoritarianism. Yes. In order to start, I would like to start with the notion of identity. Identity is infinitely significant because this is a word that has a lot of sense, and it's difficult to define it. There are people who don't think it's totally all right what we find in the dictionary, because this means that this is who we are, our ancestors, and who we are today. It includes the order of our birth. If you're the older one or the younger one in a family, it's not the same thing. It includes also biological, genetic elements, our bodies, and the geography, the political situation where we are, the actions or lack of actions. So this is a very wide and very powerful identity, because it's difficult to name each and every aspect of who we are. In order to simplify that a little bit, we recognize that identity is omnipresent and everywhere. Each individual has their own sense of identity, making them different from everyone else. Another way of recognizing our identity, it's the way we interact with our identity. It's different for every person, and also the way our identity interacts with others. Each element interacts with other elements, so it's different the way it is in every single one of us. So this means that identity is first understood as an individual phenomenon. If we ask about our identity, if we wonder about it, we think, who am I? But through our identities, we can establish links with other people. So we establish these links, and this creates a feeling of community. So identity is also community. There's Amin Maalouf, who wrote in his book, What Makes Me Myself and Not Another One, is that I am on the border of two countries, 2 or 3 languages, and several cultural traditions. This is my identity. This is the origin of these words. In his book, he says this, but he explains the reason why he says that. It's because he's of Lebanon origin, but he's recognized as a French writer. And somebody asked him, a journalist asked him, do you feel French more or more Lebanese? What is your identity? And he said to that question, because according to him, he's at the border of these 2 countries, and also at the border of 2 or 3 languages and several cultural traditions. And that's why identity is so powerful, because other people in the same situation would have said, oh, I feel more Lebanese, or I feel more French, or I'm not even connected with one or the other culture, or it's a mixture of both. But it's this capacity of recognizing our identities which is so important. And this is my third point. Identity can fundamentally be defined as a way a human being constructs their personal relationship with the environment. The reason why it's important to understand that it's to understanding our positioning. That refers to the way that we see the world, and this is also made differently. We have different experiences with the world. The way that the world sees us and perceives us will not necessarily go with the identity that we feel, but it's also a perspective on the world that we have. By recognizing our positioning, we are able to name our social position. It's as if we were driving a car. Each car has a blind spot. So in order to recognize this blind spot, even if we can not recognize it, the fact that we know where it is, that will help us make a decision so we don't get a negative impact because of this blind spot. So by recognizing our positioning, we can see where we have expertise, for instance, where we can take the space and talk on behalf of other people as well, because of some experience, and we know when we have to take a step back because this is our blind spot. So this will help us to really capture the community. We recognize that we have blind spots, and so we know that experiences or perspectives that we don't have, we have to go get them specifically. The next term I want to talk about is the worldview. This is a bit similar to positioning in the way that we see the world is impacted by our identity, but there's also ideas and knowledge, opinions are important. Our world vision has an impact on the way that we make decisions, the way we do our work, and for responsibilities and navigating relationships. It changes according to our world vision. So this has an impact on what we see as being normal. There are things that are normal, standard, and we are used to them. When you consider things normal, it can be dangerous, because when you do this, you reject other ways of being, because we see that as weird, abnormal, inferior, and so on. And this makes us incapable of dealing with the ideals of colonialism. And that leads to utopian authoritarianism. We have our vision of the world, and we're not able to recognize that this is particular and specific to us, and this is putting limits, because we are not able to hear other people and to learn from other people and their perspectives. So this is the threat of utopian authoritarianism. It's the idea that we have of a utopia is not the same as everyone else. So utopian authoritarianism, I love this word because it's really difficult to say, but most of you are people who work for municipalities or charities, and of course your mandate should be not to exist anymore. That would be a utopia where your work is not necessary anymore. So every citizen should have a good life, an ideal life, which is a utopia. And who decides what is the utopia? What are the voices that contributed to the understanding of utopia or the future? And we come back to the world vision. And what did contribute to our understanding of utopia? Who was excluded? Is this a utopia for everyone, or is it another one, or is it a dystopia? And finally, the people that drive us towards this utopia, what are their world vision, their worldview? How are we guided towards this utopia? And that's why it's important to question all this. And when we're all aware of our world vision, then we will improve our capacity for empathy, cross-cultural communication, and proactive conflict resolution. The reason why we are starting like this, it's because no matter how you define a community, no matter what kind of community the community is, this is a community based on a culture. In this question, there's a question of associations for women or anything else. There's also sexual orientation, and so the way we define our community and the elements that we use for this community, of course, there will be people that will be different, that will have different experiences in that community. It could be through cultural identity or socioeconomic identity. It could be also sexual identity or the birth order, for instance. Everybody will have a different experience, a world vision that will be different and that does not look like yours. And here we have to ask the question, how do we engage with people who hold multiple worldviews? This presentation was made with tools that will help you recognizing these multiple worldview and how they can be in a joint community. So the first thing that I would like to share is triplicity of space. This is from Production of Space by a renowned French geographer, Henri Lefebvre. According to him, there's a space, it comes from geometry. When you're in a room, the space is the four walls of that room. But his theory, if you want, that in the middle there's a concept. You are there, and your perspective, your positioning, your world's vision will occupy that space and make sense of this space, and this will transform this space. It will become a special place. So this is at the crossroads of three dimensions. There's a physical one, the social factors, and the symbolic factors. And they all come together in an individual's interpretation and understanding of space. This is a theory, but I will show you how we can take advantage of this expertise and that particular tool. These are the three dimensions. It's the perceived space with the physical characteristics of, it's the conceived space, the social, cultural characteristic of a place, and then the lived space with the symbolic meaning. With the perceived space, this refers to what we understand through the five senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. the space, we all share it. For instance, if you start community engagement and we want to use the perceived space by asking questions to people, what are the noises, the sounds, or the smells that you have in a rural area compared to what you see or feel in an urban space. If you come from New Brunswick, you will say rural place, I think, about lobsters, but in Alberta, we talk about wheat fields and oil sands. So you see, this is linked to our to our interpretation through the five senses. We have the conceived space. This space refers to it's our interaction with the space through our identities. And so these elements are shared with people that have similar elements. So if we go back to this idea of community engagement in a rural place, what makes our community unique? People will say our community welcomes people. Well, we know everyone, but in the same space, we will hear, well, it's a rural place. There's a lot of discrimination towards LGBTQA plus people. People who are not from here can feel that they are not from here, or things like that. And so this conceived space helps us understand how two people can move to the same city and they have a totally different understanding of this their surroundings because of their identity. And the lived space, this is the most individual amongst these three dimensions. And this comes from our lived experiences, senses, identities, and language use. This can change because you saw a documentary on Netflix, and the way that I see the world has changed a lot. This really changed my world view. So for the lived space, we go back to community engagement and we ask people, what is a rural area? And how do you define rural? Because you don't really have a precise definition in Canada. It depends of the person. There's no universal definition of being rural. So we ask the question, and this is associated with the lived space because everybody will say, well, Montreal and Toronto are urban, but in Nova Scotia, there's rural places. But if I talk about Rouyn-Noranda, people will say this is an urban center, that's a Cégep university. It's 40,000 people. And other people will say, no, it's a village. And it's right in the middle of nowhere. It's far from everything. There's no big airport and so on. Same thing for Halluit or anywhere in Yellowknife. They are the big urban centers. But people say, yeah, these are urban centers. But the people who go there, who move there, they say it's really small. So it's rural. So you can see how experiences, how expertise, that our experience of the world can change the way we think. So why is it useful to have this tool? This gives us a better communication we recognize the dimension through which someone is communicating an experience or a knowledge to you, then you can address them within the same dimension. In Australia, a few years back, they did a poll, a community poll, because they noticed that parents don't let their kids play in the park, and they wanted to ask the question, why? And parents, especially mothers, said, well, I'm afraid my kid will be kidnapped, so I'd like to keep an eye on them. And the answer was, look, if you look at the statistics, there's hardly any chance that your kid will be kidnapped by someone we don't know. Usually they are kidnapped by people they know. But what happens when you use statistics to communicate? We heard something that comes from the live space. Parents are afraid for their kid, or that their kid be kidnapped, because they looked at series on Netflix that say that present that idea that a kid will be kidnapped. And papers talk a lot about kidnappings, especially when it's by a parent. But even if it's not very, it doesn't happen very often. But with all the social media, everything, it looks like it's more dangerous, and people want to take care of their kid. So you see this live space, what people feel. But then we have the statistics, and you use the tool number 2, and there's no connection in between the two. But when they decided to transition towards the live space and say, well, we understand that you are afraid for your kids' safety, but we'll hire a ranger to watch your kids. And parents were more comfortable because the answer was in the same dimension. The second tool is to hold space. I love this by John Kim. Holding space means to be with someone without judgment, to donate your ears and heart without wanting anything back. It's to practice empathy and compassion, to accept someone's truth, no matter what they are, to allow and accept and you put your needs and opinion aside and allow someone to just be. So that's something that I really see very often. Space has to be shared. We have to hear what people really want to share, and you have to create the two spaces so that people can express themselves, but we have to be in a space where we're ready to hear. So that's the tool to hold space, to really actively listen. So with this idea, let's say we have 2 kids, and 2 kids come to you and they say, Daddy, Mommy, I want an orange. There's only one that's left, so you cut it in half and you give a half to each kid. Great. But what happens? But my kids, why do you want oranges? And kid number 1 says, I'd like to plant oranges, and I would like to try. And the other one, oh, I'm thirsty, I just want to drink orange juice. So, okay. So you give the seeds to one kid, and you give the other kid the juice. And there's a win-win situation. It's not always as easy as that and framed that well, but the idea to hold space and to take the time to listen to the reasons why people want something, even if it looks like a conflict, try and find what's happening underneath in order to act in the best interest of both people. rather than just doing being equitable.
Donc, pour vous aider avec, cette
To
étude de
help
parcours,
you
moi, j'ai parlé des espaces.
with this, I
Et donc,
was
j'aimerais
talking
partager
about
4
the
espaces.
spaces. I'd like to share 4
Ici,
spaces.
certains de ces espaces sont assez bien connus. Donc, tout d'abord,
These are
on a
pretty
les
well
espaces
known. First of
ensécables.
all, we have
En anglais, c'est
safe
En
spaces.
français, il y a beaucoup de traductions.
In French,
Pour
there's a
moi,
lot
je
of
donne
translation.
espace
I
ensécable,
think
mais
the best
c'est
one
pas
is
vraiment
espace
l'objectif,
insécable, but
personne
that's
ne
for
l'a
me.
demandé
It's
spécifiquement.
not the most important.
J'ai des liens dans notre première page.
I will
Mais
share
en gros,
links from the first page.
oui, mais en gros,
Uh,
avec l'espace, les espaces ensécables étaient créés par la communauté
The safe spaces is described by the community LGBTQS so that they are safe. This is a space where physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally people feel safe. Often this terminology is not used properly because we can't always have safe spaces, and conversations are difficult. When someone is uncomfortable, then the safe is no longer safe. Sorry. You cannot say it's a safe space if people do not feel safe within that space. Then we have the brave spaces. These spaces were made by the Black committee in order to be able to express on behalf of the community what they want to share and share their concerns and their priority needs. So this is a brave space when you represent a community, when you bring forward voices that are not only yours. So here you can see that I should be expressing myself on behalf of Black people, or on behalf of Francophones. That's how you support the community. We know that we will have uncomfortable conversation discussions, but they will be safe. Then we have ethical spaces. They were created by indigenous communities in order to have conversations that are important with settlers. So the idea of an ethical space is that you do not represent anyone but yourself. When you are in that space, you are a human being, you are an individual. You do not represent a nation or your work or your employer. And we can have a discussion between two human beings. But the difference is that we recognize that both people in this conversation will bring all the elements that make this person who they are. So what they say will be informed by all elements of their identity. But they don't represent anybody else but themselves. So if I take myself as an example, in an ethical space, when we talk about climate change, for instance, or we talk about impact of the housing crisis, I am Black, I'm a man, I'm French speaking in a minority area. So all these elements make me who I am, and this will inform what I say, but I do not represent anyone but myself. And I will bring all my elements, and you as well. You will do the same thing. And then we have accountable spaces. And this was written by a Black queer woman from Alberta. It's when you share the space through power dynamics, because the other ones are not a question of power. But for this one, we're talking about society power. And by recognizing this difference in society power, we try to have a space where we can align our good intentions with our actions. Like this, we avoid causing damages. So intentions are aligned with our actions. So these are 4 examples of spaces that you can use in the community space. You are there when you can listen to people and they can word what they want. Everybody has a different reality. So this is important for celebration, festivals, and the brave spaces are important for discussion groups, or you do interviews with people who are community leaders and they represent another community. The ethical space is gathering a group of people and you want to hear their perspective and where the town should be going. And then the accountable spaces is when we have different levels in the same room, we make sure that everybody is safe and protected. For a case study, we have the town of Russell in Ontario. There was a time when the township of Russell learned that they had been named by someone who got rich through being a slave owner. So there was a movement in order to ask that the township of Russell change their name. In 2024, they don't want to be called, after someone who owned slaves. So there was a counter movement as well, because a lot of people did not identify with the Russell for who the town was named, but there was also Russell Engineering, and these people had been brought up in this town that was called Russell. So it was a sentimental link, and there was also all the businesses called after Russell. So it was difficult to change name. So that was difficult. It lasted a few months. But what was really interesting is that the mayor organized a community engagement session. He divided the people for and against the name change, and he took the time to listen both sides, so for and against the name change. And then he made his decision, and the township of Russell will change the identity of the Russell. So this is another Russell that was chosen. What was interesting, he took the time to understand why the situation was so hard, because the people who wanted the name to change is people who went through a lot of discrimination in Russell. So they didn't want to go through this. So the mayor started a new committee to make sure that the representation was better. So this is what the mayor said. The Russell Village and Russell Township embody everything that Peter Russell was not. And I think it's the legacy of our community to make this a wonderful place to live and open to all, and to improve it over the generations to eliminate that kind of hatred. So what do we learn from this case study? When you hold space and you listen closely, he understood that it wasn't the name Russell that was the problem. It was the person represented by that name. So you can see that through the conceived space, and then you have the lived experience also. People said, "Oh, we don't like this name because it was a slave owner who had this name." But we still going through racism in this place, so this has to be changed. So this conceived space was recognized, and people who didn't go through racism were still attached to there was everything linked to feelings. So the mayor recognized that he communicate with people through conceived space, and then there was to be a brave space in order for members to be able to speak on behalf of the identities they belong to. And this links to equity. So I will redefine equity so that we know what we're talking about. So this a condition or state of fair, inclusive, and respectful treatment of all people. Equity does not mean treating people the same without regard to individual differences. So here you can see that equity is not the same as being equal. So we see how we can get equity throughout community engagement, but also with what we can do by being equitable and inclusive. To close, when we start in community engagement, there are best practices. You will get the slides after this presentation. There's a few of these practices that I like to talk about. This is a two-way interaction. Usually we see that as being one way. We receive feedback or information, but it's important to have this two-way interaction for each interaction, because it makes a big difference so that people feel listened to and included in this community engagement process. The other thing that I would like to share is the methodologies that we can use in order to make sure that our engagement is equitable. There's Etwapmunk. This is a concept coming from the elder Marshall, and this idea is that we use different ways of seeing the world. There's an eye that sees through the Western world, the other one through indigenous world, and so on. So you're able to advance in an equitable way. Then we have building coalitions with the queer committee. These are really for coalitions in order to bring societal changes. Then who owns data, for instance? It's very important to be equitable in the way that we give access to data, who owns the data, and so on. It's very important for safety of people that participate in community engagement. So I shared this resource by an indigenous group. Then there's hermeneutic phenomenology. I love this term. It's really fancy, but it's a way to interact on phenomenon. This is the study of a particular phenomenon, for instance, housing crisis. And rather than trying to find a universal truth, we try to study this phenomenon through the lived experience of different people. We look for individual truth, and it really changes the way that we deal with a concern or a problem. And this helps with the community. And then we have the developmental evaluation. This is the McConnell Foundation who produced this. When you do a project or a community engagement, you find a way to modify the project before when you're doing the project rather than doing it before. So the changes and modifications are made throughout the project in order to have the well-being of people in that project. I would like to finish with this quotation. Some people think they are in community, but they are only in proximity. True community requires commitment and openness, and it's a willingness to extend yourself. Thank you very much. Before I let the FCM team talk, I will share the homework that I prepared for you, and this will help you continue your reflection on the concept that we talked about and how to integrate best practices in community engagement. There. And I will share the link in French as well.
Parfait.
There.
Donc, Kiana, je vous cède la parole.
So, Kiana, thank you very much, Chuck. A great presentation. I really like the examples you provided. This being said, I will give the microphone to Jess, and he will talk about what Chuck explained, but this will be connected to the Green Municipal Fund. Go ahead, Jess. Thank you, Kiana. I'm just getting my watch so that I respect the time given me. I'm Jess. I'm a specialist of AREI at the Green Municipal Fund at FCM. I just want to give you a little idea about the new criteria in order to apply inclusive engagement to GMF applications. So this is a little agenda. I will give you the idea about the evaluations, and then we'll give you concrete examples that will help you understand with the projects that you have that are nearly done, what are the different opportunities that you have in order to integrate these ideas, because this will have different impacts. This is the English version that I translated just to explain that. I believe you're pretty familiar with these terms. The idea is this one. No matter what, how big your municipality is and what the geography is, there's different classes of citizens. And no, it's not everyone that are treated the same. There are groups that are racialized. There are queer communities, people living with disabled people, and so these group belong to three different categories. You have right holding people. These are minority groups as well, and you will see that they are 4 different ways to make sure that you will have the right level of inclusion for these communities. So you have to inform people. You have to inform the communities of your local projects, and they will understand the project better. It's unilateral, but what's interesting is to go in depth with the 4 other kinds of consultations in the community. So we have consultations. These are a way where people can provide their comments, but they can also talk about some kind of solutions, and they will have a better idea. Then you have the idea what this community as a thing, and then we have this collaboration. There's an equity status that will be reinforced, and throughout all these things, what we try to do is to have more autonomy with these people, and more they will be empowered. Will have a lasting effect for these communities after the project. This is a way to frame the terminology for your criteria so that you better understand this. And I always say that an example is worth 1,000 words. So I will give you some example. First of all, you have a good idea of the basic strategies. People say, well, I don't have the operational capacity to do all these consultations. So there are different ways of getting to the same idea. If you have material that is left over, you can donate them to people who need them. What happens is usually that we auto-manage and we do our own infrastructure project at the municipal level. So if you do a little Google search, you can find this group, and you can have a role that is more of a partnership role. But also, if you're looking for materials, you can go towards the usual providers. But if you go to local SMOs, then you can try and have a minimum quota, for instance, for what you need. And you can hire also minority workers. What I will add to this is that you try that it's not just for one project, but you establish this as being a practice, and you make it the norm in the future. It's well, for the project that allowed you to go get funds from FCM, but for the other structure development projects, you will make sure that you'll have sustainable practices, because when you are faced with this systemic exclusion, this will have an impact, a concrete impact. So we don't want your mobilization to be just on one occasion. So there's also the question of posting as well. What are the most common local languages used by the local groups? You want the posting to reflect the linguistic and cultural reality of the people in the community. When you talk about inclusion, there's also a financial economic aspect. So the way that you were able to go get funding, then you have to see which groups that could benefit from your expertise for writing applications in order to go get funded. So you can share previous applications that were successes so that other people can benefit from that. These are very simple ideas. They do not require a lot of time or anything else. And if not, the last thing that I wanted to share with you, this is what you can do now, the second part. You look on the long term. If you think about AREI, you can think about what you can do, and that will have a better impact. When you have new requests for funding, you can see if you can have co-partners for infrastructure projects. Then you can potentially get more funds, but there will be also this wealth that will be shared within your minority communities. And we talk about joint ownership, and this means that if we build some buildings and there's over representation of some communities, and we wonder who's the owner of these structure, and that's how we can do things differently. You can talk about developers as well. These are all things that allow you to have a systemic approach rather than having unique positions. When you talk about experts, you could go get people coming from these particular communities, and so you won't have to take care of the consultation process, because it's difficult when you do not have the lived experience. These people can take your place, and they will be in charge of the consultation with the people, and they will talk about strategies and solutions for your project. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that you have to think about all the projects that are to come, and what can you do differently so that all your projects are not in the same urban project or white majority districts. We have to make sure that it's accessible to the whole of the population. As I said, this is just a general idea. We'll have the consultation session to come, and we'll talk about this a bit more. So this gives you the way that you can